This is an interview with Des Barr, who retired from the Eildon district in the 1980s, and Des was in his early 50s. And I'm going to ask Des how he handled the retirement and what tips he has for other people contemplating retirement.
Yeah, John, well, from my point of view, there was a reason for my early retirement, and the reason was that my son had got married, and he'd expressed a wish to take over from me the way that I had taken over from my father when he was in his retirement years. And so I decided that between myself and my wife didn't get much of a contemplation in it because she was rather tricked into retirement, which I'll go into later. But I needed to get away from the situation on the land to give my son the opportunity to try his wings at doing what I had been doing for 30 odd years.
Yeah, and what did you do the first after you bought a house or built a house?
Well, in anything when you're changing a lifestyle, John, I think the main thing is to keep your mind occupied. And to keep my mind occupied, I lean towards the things that interested me in aspects of property management and property life, and that was the record keeping and bookkeeping. And it just so happens that my accountant at the time was keen to produce a computer system to keep records, not only accounting records but other records in a form on a computer. Now, I had never had anything to do with a computer. The most I had touched was an old portable typewriter. And so I turned to my accountant and he said to me, well, I'm going to produce this thing, what about you test it? And by the time we're finished with that, you'll have a knowledge of computers and you'll have a better idea of where you want to go with the rest of your life.
Yeah, well, how long did that entail?
Well, that started in the early 90s, and by about 1994, 95, we had produced a piece of equipment, and he suggested that I went out and sold this equipment to the grazier friends that I knew all around the West, which I did. And by the time I had finished doing that, of course, my knowledge of computers was considerably enhanced, and it gave me the satisfaction of giving the people that, like myself, who similarly had no knowledge of computers, an opportunity to learn what they needed to learn. They needed to use computers because this was the beginning of the age of computers. So that's one thing led to another after that, John.
Yeah, well, it's good. And what other tips can you give people that are
well
wonderful to do?
Yep. Well, that's about the most beneficial tip that anyone can give them is keep your mind occupied. Mine led in that direction. Somebody else's bent might be to a sport. You might take up a sport like bowls or golf or whatever to keep your body active and to keep your mind active. But in my case, I needed to keep my mind active. After all, I did leave school intending to do vet science at the Sydney University, and that never happened. So it wasn't a difficult thing for me to go to a transition to being a property manager where I was fairly prone towards keeping records, to move into an area where computerisation was an important part of it.
Yeah, you must have kept really good records because you just released a book, The Land of Extremes, about the Barr and Geary family's history.
Yes, John, it did. It did, and that's probably a product of that. These 20 years of retirement that I've now enjoyed were the culmination of the writing of this book. And that book took anything up to 10 years, not in writing, the last 3 years the actual writing was, but I began compiling material, and when I had enough knowledge to use a word processor, I started putting script together about incidents and events that had happened over the years of my family's history and my wife's family history, which at the end of the time I could then pull together with the art of cutting and pasting, which is available to a person with a word processor. I was able to write that into a book. So yes, that did result in the production of the book, which has just been completed.
Yeah, I've read the book and it's really, I can relate to a lot of the incidents because it's a lot of the same, climatic and price of the cattle and sheep happened to up.
Yep. And the things that affected you affected me in the same way, and you're reading in my life things that you say, that's the same sort of thing that happened in my life. But there are other people who are going to read this book, and if you ever get around to writing something like that, it will be something that these people have never read, and in years to come, there'll be young people read through that and have no knowledge whatever of what transpired in those years. And I hope that in years to come, my young family and other people's young family will gain a perception of what life was like in the bush that you and I experienced, but we cannot possibly pass on to others in any other form.
Yeah, well, probably in 30 years' time, there mightn't be any of your family on the land.
Most likely not. In fact, there are none now that have gone back on the land. Some of my brother's family have a small property. One of them rang me not long ago and said, well, do you know, Uncle, I'm the only Barr that owns land. And I said, well, I don't know if it's an advantage or a disadvantage, Greg, but yeah, you're right, you're the only Barr that owns land. But the record keeping was most important then, and it will always be most important. I was particular about it, and the diaries that I kept, without the diaries I couldn't have written the last 3 parts of that book. The first 2 parts were the history of the 2 families, but the last 3 parts were the history of my wife and I's life on the land, and without the records that I kept, that couldn't have been written. One of the things that I did specifically and was always interested in was learning to employ methods of improvement in wool production and sheep production. And to do that, I reckon you need to have records of previous years to compare with. Without comparison, you can't hope to improve anything. And I used to keep very detailed records, which I referred to when I come to writing that book.
Is there any other plans for the future now, Des?
Well, when you get to this stage in life, when you're in your 70s, and you've got certain health problems, you've got to make up your mind whether you want to spend money on putting in a new chassis under an old motor car that's motor's worn out. You've got to make those decisions of just what you do, and in my case, no, I don't want to go down that track. So I will probably do, as I've suggested in the book, to members of my family, there are lots of starting points, dates, people's birthdays, people's names, and the kids that issued from a certain union of 2 people. I haven't gone on with those things that are now called in some circles the family tree. I haven't done that, but I have been given for Christmas just recently a piece of software called Ancestry.com, which allows me, if I wish to, and maybe I will in the coming years, sit down and link all those together, go and find where the uncles, cousins and aunts are, all those families that I don't know. I heard stories about them, but I can now put them together with modern software.
Yeah, well, best of luck in the future, especially if you go on with that history project.
And thank you, John, yeah, and best of luck with your project too. This is a little project of yours, and it could transpire into something well worthwhile, and I hope it does.
Thanks, Des.
Good on you.